How do you write a detective story that stands out from the rest? Hi, I am writer and artist Dan Finley, and this is The Story Grind, a show where we look at storytelling so we can become better storytellers. On today's episode, we are going to study Friday, a young adult detective story from Image Comics and Panel Syndicate. Before we start, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to the channel. Okay, before I start getting into this video, let me first talk a little bit about how this comic is distributed, because it's a little bit unique. There is a print edition that you can get through Image Comics. It's like a regular trade paperback, but you can actually get a digital edition, which is where I think this was originally released on a website called panelsyndicate.com. And on this website, you can actually name your own price, which is kind of cool. If you wanted to download this comic for completely free, you could. Just go to the website and click the buy now and enter in $0. I believe that's how I first discovered Friday. And since then, I've seen it everywhere. And it's definitely a story worth checking out. So I would highly recommend, even if you pick up just the first issue for free, but you can also pick up the entire arc, which I believe is 9 issues long, for free. And here's the creative team behind it. So some of the names you're going to recognize, including Ed Brubaker, who is kind of like the preeminent detective storyteller in comics right now. Actually, that might be a little controversial to say, but he has a large body of work that is centered around detective comics. So definitely worth checking out more of his work if you like this story. All right, so let's start with the log line, which I think is going to be interesting to kind of pull apart. In fact, I'm just going to start pulling it apart right away. So here we go. We're going to start off with the ordinary world. Friday Fitzhugh spent her childhood solving crimes and digging up occult secrets with her best friend, Lancelot Jones, the smartest boy in the world. But that was the past. Now she's in college starting a new life on her own. So there we go. 2 sentences right there that establish the ordinary world. Now let's get into the inciting incident, which, as I always say, the word when is your key word to reveal the inciting incident, and it's no exception here. Let's look at it. It says, except when, again, our inciting incident, and now we'll get into the objectives of these main characters. Except when Friday comes home from the holidays, she's immediately pulled back into Lance's orbit and finds that something very strange and dangerous is happening in their little New England town. This is literally the Christmas vacation from hell, and neither of them may survive to see the new year. So the logline delivers on the outside conflict, but what separates it from other detective stories? I would say at this point, not much, which is too bad, because I think this story has a lot more to offer. I usually like to tie the internal or personal conflict into the logline, and that's a great way of helping some stories stand out, especially in the very crowded arena of detective stories. So this story has a great personal conflict and internal conflict. So I really think there's a missed opportunity here in the log line. Normally I would kind of dig in a little bit deeper, maybe revise it, but I'm going to skip it for this one because I think the story is really worth getting to. So let's just dive in. All right, scene 1, 8 pages long. We get a shot of a forest on the edge of a city at night. A flashlight beam swims through the trees, and we get a narration telling us that Friday Fitzhugh returned to Kings Hill to spend time with her mom and aunt. But within an hour of returning, she's been roped into a new case by her old friend and partner, Lancelot Jones, and the sheriff. Side note is we don't actually know who's narrating at this point. All right, back to the scene. The narrator continues by telling us that something has happened between her and Lance the night before she left for college. Friday wonders if Lance is making this mystery up to avoid talking about it. This is a fun opening question. Not a big plot point, but it does create a question that hangs over this scene. But this also sets us up for a bit of personal conflict between our two characters and elevates this beyond a simple detective mystery or outside conflict. We've also been told that Friday is back in town to think, which means she has her own internal conflict, which hasn't been revealed yet. So within the first 2 pages of this story, we've established an outside conflict, which is the mystery. We've established a personal conflict, which is a rift between Friday and Lance, and an internal conflict that we don't have any details about yet. Really well done. I'm already interested, and the scene's not even over yet. Back to the scene. Friday says she saw someone watching them, and Lance replies with someone or something. Friday says it was a person, or at least person-shaped. Now, I really like the last half of that sentence because it puts a whole spin on the world established so far. Up until this point, we were watching a young adult detective type mystery. But with this exchange, I start to think that there's something more fantastical in this world. And on top of that, these characters don't seem to be phased, which means they've dealt with this stuff before. This is a great exchange that does some world building for us in only a few lines of dialogue. Really fun. While we're here, I actually want to highlight the visuals where Friday sees something in the darkness of the woods. I really like how subtle the detail is here. I had to actually scan back and forth a couple of times between the panels to see what had changed. I think the reason this works is because we have 3 focal points, which is the tree, the rock, and another tree. But the thing that disappears is actually incredibly subtle, and it's in between the trees. I thought this was a really successful effect. Back to the scene. Lance says they're not far from Crescent Rock, and the sheriff plays the part of the uninformed and asks, what does that matter? This gives Lance an opportunity to explain to the sheriff and to us, the readers, that in the dark times of long ago, women would trek through the snow and sacrifice their weakest offspring to the ancient gods. The child howled into the night, and the gods heard their cries. We get some fantastical, maybe occultish visuals that reinforce that these detectives aren't dealing with your average real-world mysteries. We cut back to them walking through the forest, and Lance wraps up his story saying that a lot of restless things are wandering in the woods. And then we take a weird turn where the narrator says, wait a second, is Lance implying that she, meaning Friday, is imagining things? This was a strange move because up until this point, the narrator appeared all-knowing and was catching us up on the current mystery. But now, the narrator is actually questioning what was just said as if they're watching the scene with us. At first, I thought it was Friday saying this, but it's definitely not. I am a little curious as to why the creative team decided to change up the narrator's point of view like this. This scene ends with Lance seeing the person they're looking for, even though we don't see that person yet. This answers the question Friday initially asked, which is Lance making this up to avoid talking to her? Apparently not. So it sets Friday up to be possibly a little bit paranoid, or at least asking herself questions, which I think is important for a detective to do. Okay, that takes us into scene 2, 4 pages long. Now we flash back in time. Friday is on the train right before she returns to Kings Hill. The narrator tells us that Friday was worried about what to say to Lance when she returned home for Christmas. They'd been friends since they were kids, and now she didn't know how to talk to him. Side note, I want to point out this street light. I really love how the mark making fades the light into darkness. I'm definitely going to steal that for one of my projects. Okay, back to the scene. Friday is off the train when Lance calls out to her. We see the sheriff is driving Lance around, and Lance tells Friday to hop in the car. They're on a case. He doesn't even give a typical hello. Friday jumps in the car, and the narrator tells us about the case. Lance and the sheriff are after someone named Weasel Wadsworth, who ran off with an ancient stone dagger from a nearby archaeological dig. Weasel has lost his mind, and Lance suspects the dagger has possessed him. The narrator tells us that it was so easy for Friday to drop back into the role of Lance's mystery hunting partner. It was exciting yet sad, like holding hands with someone you broke up with. The sheriff's headlights reveal Weasel's car, and they find his trail following the footprints leading into the woods. Alright, scene 3, 7 pages long. Alright, we're back into the present, which are the following moments after scene 1, where they've discovered the person off screen. Now we know who it is. It's Weasel with the dagger. Friday, Lance, and Sheriff are watching him from behind a rock, and he's carving symbols, strange symbols, into a tree with the ancient dagger. Weasel is mumbling something about the white lady until he's discovered. Friday takes a rock, surrounds it with snow, and creates a snowball that she pelts Weasel in the face with. Here's a little side note. I love these 2 panels and the movement. We see Friday throwing the snowball from right to left, and then in the next panel shows Weasel's reaction as he takes the snowball to the face and drops the knife from left to right. Some really great movement in the panels there. Back to the scene. Someone grabs the knife, making sure not to touch it with their skin. And I do think this is a little hilarious because Friday tells Weasel to calm down, even though she just pelted him in the face with a snow-covered rock. Weasel makes a run for it, and Friday is after him. Also, another side note, I really like that the sheriff is kind of taking a back seat to all of this, even though he's the adult in the proverbial room. It's a young adult mystery, and the only adult, a sheriff, is really there just to add some validity to their detective work. Also, I like how Friday is playing against type. She's very much the muscle in this detective pairing. The narrator tells us that Weasel was the son of the richest man in Kings Hill and acted like he owned the whole town. Friday and Lance had dealt with Weasel before, stopping him from ripping off kids and selling pills, but she's never seen him like this before. Friday takes Weasel down with another snowball. This one knocks him out as he mumbles the name The White Lady once again. Scene 4, 1 page long. We're in the back of the cop car with Friday and Weasel as he wakes up, still mumbling about the White Lady. The narrator tells us that they're on their way to the hospital. Lance is in the front seat saying that the carving Weasel was making into the tree reminded him of a drawing in a lime cave that dated back to 700 BC. So this is our next clue in this detective mystery. The narrator also tells us that Lance isn't looking back at Friday and he's casually avoiding eye contact, like the last hour never happened. Again, the creative team is prodding us with the sort of internal, personal conflict that Friday has with Lance. Suddenly, Weasel gets some clarity and addresses Friday directly, saying, "She sees you, the White Lady knows you." So kind of opening up a little bit more menace, a little bit more intrigue in the scene. Scene 5, 3 pages long. They've dropped Weasel at the hospital, and the narrator tells us that Friday is now determined to have a conversation with Lance. Friday's plans are derailed as Lance and the sheriff decide to leave Friday there at the hospital and return to the woods to get some photos of Weasel's etchings. Friday was hoping to talk to Lance, but Lance says he'll come by in the morning to show her what he's been working on. Friday isn't happy about it, but she accepts it. She calls her mom to pick her up and waits. She's heard the phrase "the White Lady" before, but she can't remember where from. Her final words are, "Damn it, Lance." Whatever happened between them is still on her mind. That's it for the first issue. Let's look at a 10,000-foot view of the story. But before we do, Story Grind is brought to you by the stories that I make. Get one of my digital mini comics for free when you join the newsletter and get monthly updates on my writing journey. If you want to see more of my work, check out my novels on Amazon and my comics on Gumroad. Links are below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Your support means a lot, especially to a small channel like this. So let's take a look at the whole story and break it down scene by scene. We have a total of 5 scenes. 2 pretty long scenes, one 7 pages and one 8 pages. There's something really interesting happening here in the way these scenes are ordered, but I'm going to go into that in just a little bit. Mysteries are an interesting genre of storytelling. They can sometimes be easy because they create a question with the reader that the reader wants answered, right? It's like a mental puzzle. But they're also kind of hard because they all follow a similar pattern. I mean, how do you keep people's interest in a typical mystery? I think the creative team does a really great job here. They give us a lot of personal and internal conflict for the characters to play with, which are also a mystery to us. What happened between Friday and Lance? Why is she struggling to talk to him? Why is she worried about returning home? If this were just a story about solving a mystery of a possessed dagger, it wouldn't be nearly as interesting to me. It's really the internal personal struggles that I find the most engaging. And this is interesting to me because when I look at most detective stories, the detective is a flat or iconic character, meaning that they don't really change from the beginning of the story to the end of the story. They don't usually have an internal conflict. This also is a big reason why detective stories tend to create many books in a series. You can think of Jack Reacher, or James Bond is a sort of detective, or Sherlock Holmes is an obvious detective, or Batman. These are characters who pretty much stay the same from book to book, but the mystery is really the center of the interest for the reader. So this brings me to another thing that I touched on in the summary. These kinds of stories rely on a standard trope where the detective's first-person point of view narrates the story. But Friday is a little bit different in that the narration is coming from a different point of view. We don't exactly know who's narrating at this time, but they are omniscient, and at other times they're actually discovering things while we're discovering things. Again, sort of strange, but also kind of refreshing. I'm grateful that this is coming from a different point of view because I actually have a hard time reading any first-person point of view detective stories without thinking of, or I should say hearing, Humphrey Bogart's voice in my head from his role in The Maltese Falcon. Okay, let's go back into what I mentioned earlier with the scene structure. One of the interesting discoveries I made with this story are the first two scenes. Notice how they're flipped out of order? But why is that? I mean, if we flip scenes 1 and 2 right now, we'd have a pretty standard narrative with Friday arriving in town, getting picked up by Lance and the sheriff, finding Weasel's car, searching the woods, and then discovering Weasel carving the tree. So why did the creative team decide to flip these two scenes? I think it's because the first scene, as is in the book, really initiates the mystery for us. It's not exactly a cold open, but it does start us in the middle of the action. It hooked me in and really made me want to know more about these characters and their history. So when we hit scene 2, I'm actually more willing to kind of sit back and understand where these characters are coming from and what their backstory is. This is not a revolutionary technique by any means, but it is a great strategy, and I'll definitely put that in my back pocket for future stories. So what did you think of Friday? Would you continue reading? Was there anything that I missed? If so, please leave it in the comments below. That's it for this episode of The Story Grind. I am writer and artist Dan Finley. Please like, subscribe, and share with your storytelling friends so we can build a community of storytellers together. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you next episode.